Ceramics are produced through the interaction of the four elements. Earth. Clay comes from the earth and is shaped with the potter artist's hands into a multitude of forms, limited only by the maker's imagination. Water makes the dry clay soft and pliable. Air dries the piece after shaping, prior to firing. Fire gives the work its final form, converting the clay's crystalline structure into a ceramic material much harder than the original clay and able to retain this hardness and shape on contact with liquids. Toya phase pottery. The lack of prehistoric pottery in central Texas is due to the relatively brief time it was used in the region. Only 500 years out of the last 12,000 years of human presence. In the 14th century, a culture known as the Toya phase flourished around the Edwards Plateau of central Texas. This indigenous group was the last prehistoric people before the cultural upheaval introduced by European explorers. Toya phase pottery was made by adding animal bone to wet clay, probably deer or bison bones that had been charred and crushed into a dry powder. The pottery was made using the coil method. It was typically smoothed and polished and sometimes decorated with a red ochre slip or post-firing wash, or less commonly with simple incised decorations. The pots were fired in a surface fire fueled by brush, grass, or buffalo dung. Archaeologists typically find only small pieces, potsherds, often less than the size of a quarter. The low-fired earthenware broke easily and weathered badly. 19th century ceramics. Historical ceramic production by non-native people in Texas dates from about 1830. As Anglo-Americans began to move into the state during the second quarter of the 19th century, traditional craftsmen from Northern Europe came with them. 19th century Texas potteries were located near suitable clay outcrops and included both part-time and full-time, rural and urban, kin and non-related individuals. Most early potteries were operated by uncles, brothers, sons-in-laws, and nephews who immigrated from other parts of the U.S. or from Europe. Besides providing artisans skilled in pottery making, European immigration created a demand for locally manufactured pots because importing such ware was prohibitively expensive. Stoneware vessels were the traditional form of ceramic ware used for the storage and preparation of foods by the predominantly agrarian culture of the U.S. at that time. The early potteries usually consisted of small shops employing only 1 or 2 men and producing stoneware on a more or less seasonal basis. Few decorative or purposely artistic pieces were produced. Small amounts of the fire brick were sometimes made for sale. The earliest known Texas stoneware pottery was established by Taylor Brown in 1839 near Henderson in Rusk County. By 1860, similar potteries were operating in Austin, Bastrop, Denton, Guadalupe, Henderson, Lee, Limestone, Montgomery, Rusk, Titus, and Waller counties. During the late 19th and early 20th century, more than 60 stoneware potteries were manufacturing across the state. After 1875, larger shops became established. By 1900, some semi-industrialized shops were operating in Texas, and their production was fairly large. Much of the individuality of the early wares was lost, and straight-sided white pots became the monotonous product. Most work was made by hand on a potter's wheel. This simple machine, basically a disc mounted on an axle, has been used for shaping round ceramic forms since 3000 BCE. Motor-driven wheels are commonly used today. 4 types of stoneware glaze were used in the 19th and early 20th century. Alkaline, wood ash, salt, natural clay slip, Albany slip, Bristol. Common kiln types included updraft and downdraft, beehive, and crossdraft groundhog kilns. By 1950, most of the stoneware potteries of Texas had closed. The few that were still operating enlarged their flower pot and artware production. The Marshall pottery remains the only pottery from the era producing wheel-thrown utilitarian stoneware, which it produces in limited amounts. Its larger output is mass-produced earthenware flower pots. Archaeological evidence exists for many of the 19th and early 20th century Texas potteries and includes kilns and waste sherd piles. A few sites are on the National Register of Historic Places. Bastrop County Potteries, Randolph Manufacturing Company, aka the Duncan Jug Factory, Stoker Pottery, McDade Pottery. Several 19th century potteries existed in and around the town of McDade, thanks to an abundant supply of suitable clay and a man named Matthew Duncan, the patriarch of McDade potters. Matthew taught his sons, son-in-law, grandsons, and others the art of making pottery. As a result of his influence, the area has been home to numerous potters and potteries. James W. Allen, Potter Shop. Matthew Duncan, Duncan Jug Factory, Alum Creek. J. Duncan, Oak Hill area. Milton Stoker, McDade Town Site. Milton Stoker, R.L. Williams, McDade Town Site. R.L. Williams, McDade Pottery, Alum Creek, McDade Site. Willie Taylor, McDade Town Site. D.W. Bowles, McDade Town Site. Butler Brick and Pottery, Butler, Texas. When R.L. Williams purchased Stoker Pottery business in 1890, he began a complete renovation, building a new plant that covered 3 acres, complete with 2 brick beehive kilns, clay grinding equipment, and a railroad siding. On January 26, 1893, he personally made the first piece of ware in the new plant. He continued wheel-made production of specialty items and the manufacture of food storage vessels and housewares, but also added new products. Williams invented an extrusion press with assorted sizes of dies for the rapid production of flower pots and other hollowware. He was granted a U.S. patent for the invention in 1909. McDade pottery sold to nurseries and florists throughout Texas and also in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. The advent of cast plastic substitutes for heavy ceramics reduced the demand for pottery products. The greatest blow to the business was the loss of R.L., who died in 1923. The business was continued by his son, Albert Payne Williams Sr., on a reduced scale until World War II, when it closed. Although located 65 miles from Bastrop, a notable series of potteries operated in Capote during the later half of the 19th century. In 1857, the first Wilson pottery was founded by John McCaney Wilson, a Presbyterian minister, to manufacture alkaline and salt glazed ware. Reverend Wilson was not a potter, so the shop's activities were conducted by his slaves, Hiram, James, George, and Andrew. Following the Civil War, Wilson's newly emancipated laborers took his surname and founded a second pottery, H. Wilson and Company, on land granted to them by their former master. With the money he made from the pottery, Hiram Wilson started a church and a school. He died relatively young in 1884. Following Hiram's death, James and Wallace left H. Wilson and Company and became part owners of a third pottery that remained in business until 1903, when it closed. In 1866, Irishman Michael Butler sailed to New York, found work as a bricklayer's helper, and then as a mason. In 1869, he moved to Dallas, where he established his first brickworks. The bricks were made with the soft mud process by pressing Trinity River clay into wooden molds. Butler installed the first coffee mill machine for brickmaking in Texas. The apparatus was operated by a mule pulling a wooden shaft in a circle around the machine, forcing the clay into wooden molds. In 1873, Michael sold the Dallas plant and founded Butler Brick in Austin. This plant produced bricks until 1875, when a flood destroyed the site. In 1876, Butler built a second Austin plant along the Colorado River. A sword machine replaced the coffee mill machine, improving the quality and quantity of production at the new plant. The new apparatus could fill 8 molds. After finding high-quality clay along Sandy Creek near Elgin, Butler opened a third factory, Elgin Butler Brick, in 1901. In 1907, he founded Elgin Pottery Company to manufacture terracotta, clay furnaces, flue thimbles, flower pots, fire brick, and floor tile. The dry press method replaced the wood mold process. In the new process, clay was ground and pressed into shape without the addition of water. During World War II, Austin brickyards were placed on standby due to war restrictions and price freezes. The Butlers moved all brick-making work to Elgin. Austin Plant No. 2 was used for storage until its demolition in 1958. The brickyards in Plant 3 were demolished in 1958. Today, Elgin Butler Brick produces fire brick and specialty structural glazed tiles. After being passed through 4 generations of Butlers, the family sold the company in 2005. By the late 19th century, handmade pottery was no longer in demand for everyday use. Mass manufacture non-ceramic vessels were less fragile, lighter weight, and cheaper to produce. This made hand-making pottery too labor-intensive and time-consuming to continue as a viable trade. It was not long, though, before a backlash against soulless, mass-produced objects was expressed in the arts and crafts movement. The movement rejected a perceived decline in standards associated with machinery and factory production. Combined with a growing awareness of Asian ceramics, this reaction led to the birth of studio pottery, also known as art pottery. Studio pottery is made by artists working alone or in small groups, producing unique items or short runs. Typically, all stages of manufacture are carried out by one individual. The tradition started in Texas during the 1930s and lasted well into the 20th century. Since the turn of the 21st century, ceramics is once again experiencing a revival. The phenomenon is global and far-reaching. Restaurants and cafes are commissioning custom tableware, while artists well known for work in other media are creating functional and sculptural pieces. Bastrop area ceramicists are part of the movement too. They continue a long-time local tradition and at the same time are exploring new forms and methods for making distinctive handmade objects. The informal network, Bastrop Area Clay Artists, was founded so that members could celebrate and share their passion for all things ceramic. The following slides showcase some of their work.